Okay, so I want to basically show you two things today. One is how Spring Boot can help you to develop applications, how you can focus on your code, how you can get started very easily and very quickly. So I want to show you that, and we're going to develop a small application together to basically illustrate that in practice. And then I want to show you what Spring Boot brings, the features that Spring Boot brings, so-called non-functional features. So the things that you need regardless of the application that you are building. So whatever the type of the application that you build, you always need things to administer the application, manage the configuration, check what's going on in your app in production, package your application in various environments. So I want to show you how it works. So let's start with the first part of the presentation. And first of all, maybe some questions. Who doesn't know about Spring Boot at all? Never heard of it? Okay, 3, 4. Who's already using it? That's 40%. Who's already using it in production? That's 40%, okay. So for those who don't know about it or never use it, one way to get started is to use the guides. So we have some guides on the Spring.io website. So Spring.io/guides, which is a Spring Boot application, by the way, and open source. So you want to check it out on GitHub if you want to see what the code that's behind the Spring.io website. Another one, so this application behind me is also a Spring Boot application. And it's really a small service that allows you to generate a quick start project. So as you can see, there's not many options there. You can basically select the build system that you want to use and the Spring Boot version that you want to use and some basic coordinates for your project. And then you can shop for dependencies, right? So I want to build a GPA-based application with security, and I don't want REST repositories and H2 database, H2 with 2. And then you click Generate Project. That's going to download you something with an empty app. So just what's required to start an empty app with those dependencies. And as you will see in a minute, the fact that the project has dependencies, Spring Boot will react to that. So Spring Boot will react to what's in your class path. It will find that you have some classes available, which obviously means you want to use them. And it will auto-configure something if you don't have any opinions. So read if you don't have any user configuration. So clicking Generate Project, basically, you create a zip file. You can extract that in your file system and then open your favorite IDE on top. But you can also do that right from the IDE. So I'm using IntelliJ. If you use Eclipse or if you use NetBeans, they have similar features. I don't think that the NetBeans integration is there yet, but they are working on it definitely. So I'm going to use this Spring Initializer tab. As you can see, it's using the same instance, or you can use your own. Same setup here. I'm going to choose the latest release because I want to, well, the latest milestones to be exact. We are going to release 1.4 in a couple of weeks now, which will use Spring Framework 4.3 for those who were at the previous presentation. And I'm just going to select web here. So these are all the things that I could use. Obviously, you can use more, but these are the things that we have core auto-configuration for. I'm going to call that GOTO AMS. And that's it, done. Downloads the project for me, extract that where I've asked, and auto-configure it in the IDE, which means I already have a run application here, and everything is set up in the IDE. So when you start with a new project, the first thing you do is you do an hello world, right? And this is a web application, so I'm going to create an hello controller. So I'm going to create a simple method, very obvious. If you invoke the root of the web application, it will return a simple hello message. Easy enough. The purpose here is everything you're going to see in this presentation is focused on configuration and infrastructure, not really features by themselves. So I want to show you how Spring Boot helps you to architect your application, configure your application, package your application, test your application, etc. So I'm going to return a string, and I'm going to say, hello, GOTO Amsterdam, to say something. And I'm going to map that to the root. And I'm going to say this is a REST controller. Start. So start, interesting, let's see. Start is nothing but running a main class. So there is a demo application here that was generated automatically. If we look at what it looks like, this is it. A class with a Spring Boot application annotation basically flag this. This is a Spring Boot application, and all kinds of nice defaults will be inferred from that. And a main with a single line, a Spring application run. So basically, run this application, and if someone passes command line arguments, pass them along so that we can do something about it. In this case, there is none. And if I go on localhost 8080, I have an app. Okay, so where is Tomcat? Where is Jetty? I haven't gone into the build system to run a WAR file that I have to deploy somewhere. I run a main class, right? So that's the idea behind Spring Boot. It's really to help you focus on your code, stay in the IDE as much as you can, do as much as you can in the IDE. So if when you were in university learning about computer science, or learning about computer science anywhere at all, you probably had to do some exercises, and one thing that you had to do is create a simple Java application. And the simplest way to run that Java application is to create a main class and execute some code in that. So Spring Boot is back to basics, except that all the modern features you've used to, you can still use them. So let's look at the build, and you'll see it's quite simple. Basically brings two dependencies. You'll see that there is a common pattern in the name, Spring Boot starter something. So this is on purpose. It's to help you identify the things that we support, and also have a common prefix, because the idea is autocompletion, as you'll see in a minute. So this application, I checked the web thing, if you remember, in the wizard. I'm basically building a web application. So I'm telling, I want to build a web application. Please give me the things that are required, the minimum amount of dependencies that are required to build a web application. And that's going to bring, because it's opinionated, it's going to bring Spring MVC, GSR 303 validation, and an embedded container. In this case, it's Tomcat. So this is why your main is starting a web application. It's actually starting Tomcat. It's configuring Spring MVC. There is a REST controller in your app. It will figure that out because it's in a sub-package of the application, right? So if you look at Spring Boot application, you'll see three things important. This is a Spring Boot configuration. Please enable auto-configuration. So please look at my class path, look at my configuration, look at my environment, and infer things if I didn't. And the last one is component scan. So we are going to scan this package and all the sub-packages for beans. Right. So that was easy enough as an example, but we want to build an app that exposes some data. So I want to show you what it takes if you want to expose some data from a database as a REST endpoint. So I'm going to create a simple JP entity, and I'm going to expose that as a REST endpoint. How much time do you need to do that? What kind of infrastructure code do you need to create to be able to build an application like that? So I don't want to code all that by hand, because you'll probably die by then. So I have this. Okay, maybe I should add the dependencies first. Okay, sorry. So, first thing to do. I want to build a JPA-based application now. I want to expose that as a REST repositories. So I need obviously also a database. So I'm going to shop again. Spring Boot starter something. And I can see I have a GPA starter. Okay. Again, Spring Boot starter. I want to expose that my data as a REST endpoint. There is a starter for that. And finally, I need a database, and I'm going to use H2 because that's simple enough for my simple app here, but you could use MySQL, PostgreSQL, whatever. Okay, so now my speaker works. And as you can see, there is nothing fancy about it. That's really plain JPA entity. I'm going to create a repository for it. Again, no Spring Boot related API. So the message is, Spring Boot is not a new framework to learn. It's based on the Spring portfolio. It's on top of the Spring portfolio, and it helps you configuring your app. So if you look at this, it's a plain Spring Data repository. So if you don't know about Spring Data, who doesn't know about Spring Data? Okay, 4 brave, 5, 6, okay. So in a nutshell, it provides an abstraction on top of many data store, and that's actually going to create a bean that works, and those queries will be inferred automatically based on the method signature. So the first one tells, I want to find a speaker, because the return type is a speaker and not a collection, whose Twitter account is the one that I pass as a parameter. And the second one is, I want to find all speaker whose last name is the last name. There is also some REST-related annotation there. I'm going to go back on those in a minute. Last step, I want some data in my database when I start it up. So I'm using this feature from Hibernate that allows me to do that. So basically, if there is an imported SQL file at the root of the class path, and Hibernate creates the schema, it will also execute the SQL statement in that file. So if I restart and I go to speakers, I have this. And it's being exposed. And I can also look at one speaker. So this is what it takes to build an endpoint. And this is fully REST endpoint, by the way. So if you post to speakers, it's going to create one. If you do a delete HTTP request to this, that's going to delete Jürgen, which may be unfortunate. And if you do a get, you'll get that JSON representation. So again, nothing to do with Spring Boot. The Spring Data REST project does that for you. But if you're not using Spring Boot, you need to wire those things together. You need to enable the scanning of repositories. You need to say, OK, I want to deploy my repositories in that namespace, etc. So if we go back to the annotation, you've seen this by Twitter thing. That's going to customize the endpoint for the search. So if I go back on speakers, this is fully linkable API, so I can see that I have a search endpoint here. And on the search endpoint, I can see I have a by Twitter search endpoint. And I can also execute a query remotely. So if you have a JavaScript client and you want to invoke that, it's very easy to do. OK. So reminder, I haven't configured anything yet. OK, no configuration. I'm just writing code. And this is what's happening. Next step. It's a web application which exposes highly sensitive information, so I'm going to add security to it. So what do I do? Probably get that by now, right? I'm going to add the starter, and there is one. OK. Let's restart and see what happens. here, for instance. Okay, I have to log in now. So these are the decisions that we take. We don't know anything about your app. You've had it, the security starter, which brings Spring Security. You have no configuration whatsoever. So we are going to secure everything, use basic authentication with the wonderful Spring realm that you don't see. You're supposed to see Spring somewhere, but that's gone now. And I need a user and a password to log in, right? So what would that be? Admin, no. Nice try. Sorry? Could be, but no. I also had Spring Boot, like Scott Tiger, but that's not it either. So, okay, one hint. The username is user. Password. Nope. 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 Okay, so one thing we didn't want to do, and we had the answer there, thank you, is we don't want to write the default password in the developer guide. Because if you forget, if you're too lazy, or whatever, you had a bad day, not enough coffee, I don't know, you may deploy that thing somewhere when you're not supposed to. And someone can read the developer guide and log into your app. So what we do is every time the application starts, we generate a password, and we put that in the log, right here. Okay, let me try that. Done. So there's two things about that. One is it's changing all the time. So every time you restart the app, the password will change. And two, we make it long enough so that it really bugs you. And there is only one purpose for it, is that you do something about it, right? Do something, anything. So this will be the first time in this demo that I'm actually going to have an opinion. I'm going to say to Spring Boot, okay, fine, the default password, that's easy enough for one try, but it's bugging me, so I want to act on that. So let's do something. So I'm going to write configuration now. Here, for instance, because my Spring Boot application is a configuration class. So I'm going to write something like this. And if you look at the imports, that again, it's not Spring Boot, it's Spring Security. So anything you know about Spring Security, just reuse this. It's nothing different, it's the same thing. So I'm going to create two users. I'm going to create an authentication manager in memory. But if you look at the SPI, you have plenty of options. You can do JDBC, LDAP, and whatnot. I'm going to create two users, and one is a hero, and one is a simple user. Okay? So let's restart that thing and see what happens. Okay, hero. Done. And if we go back to the log of this application, there is no password being generated anymore because it doesn't make sense. You had an opinion, so we're not going to do that thing anymore. And plus, you see that we still see that dialog, that basic authentication dialog, opening. So it's not because you have an opinion on 10% of the security setup that you'll have to redo the 90%. We'll identify that you have an opinion on the 10% and we'll apply your custom 10% to the rest of the auto configuration. And we do that for everything. Well, whenever we can, at least. All right. So there is plenty of things I could show you. I could show you, for instance, template engines. I could bring Timeleaf and create a template and basically render the speaker. If I had time, I would do that. But there is a session right after lunch, Spring Boot for the web, which will deeply focus on that. So I'm not going to show you this. But instead, I would like to switch to part 2. What does Spring Boot brings? What features does Spring Boot bring? So really about things that you get as a feature if you start to use Spring Boot. So for that, I'm going to add a dependency again. that summarize those features. And it's called actuator. Don't ask me what it means. I got the question every time I give this presentation and always forgot what that means. So go on Wikipedia or something. And what actuator is going to add to your app is management endpoints, administrative endpoints, things that allow you to manage the configuration of your app, or to debug your app remotely, or check if your app is healthy, or retrieve information about your app. Okay, so first thing, let me show you the environment endpoint. Okay, it didn't work. Anybody know why it didn't work? So, reminder, it's something that you need to access to have sensitive information about your app. I have a forbidden, which means I can't access to that. I'm not an administrator, right. So what does it take to be an administrator? What do I need? I need a role, okay. What role would that be? You said? Admin. Yes, I need to be admin. And if I go back to my config here, on purpose, as you would suspect by now, I'm not an admin. Okay? So what can I do? I can basically do this. I can, oh yeah, Spring Boot, you forces me to do this, whatever. And it will work. But I don't want to do that, right? I don't want to show you this. I want to show you that Spring Boot can react to your need and your design and the decisions that you make. We provide a default. If you're not happy with the default, you can perfectly change it. So in this case, I want to tell to Spring Boot, you know, the default role to access the management endpoints is admin. In my app, I don't like admin for whatever reason. I want it to be hero instead. So the way to tell that to Spring Boot is to configure the auto configuration, so to provide a configuration key. So basically a property that you set, which default values is admin, and you want to set hero instead. Okay, so there is one file. Let me take that down. There is one file that we haven't seen yet, which is this application property thing. This is the configuration infrastructure of Spring Boot, which is really, really there's a lot of features in it. So you can specify configuration in this file. You can put that file outside of your app. You can pass command line switch. You can pass system properties. You can pass environment variables. If you're into GNDI, you can also connect to GNDI and retrieve those values from GNDI. So now the next step in our journey is to find the key. What key do I have to use to set that role? So usually what we do is we go on Google or Stack Overflow. And I've heard some people actually read documentation also, though it doesn't happen very often. So the Spring Boot team, we really wanted to do something about it, right? We wanted to give a better assistance and to help you and let you stay, so that you stay in the ID, so that you don't leave the ID. That's really one of our focus. So if I'm in that file, and I tap role, I get an auto-completion with the available options. Again, I'm using IntelliJ IDE. Don't worry. If you use STS or NetBeans, they have similar integration. And the NetBeans integration is done. So this auto-completion in the NetBeans works. It doesn't for the new project wizard, the thing I used at the beginning. Maybe it's implemented by now. But that thing is there for a while. So as you can see, if I tap role, the first option is the right one. And you can see that the default value is admin. And I'm going to say hero instead. And we start the thing, which really annoys me now. OK. If I do that, it works. OK? If your brain is melting by now, oh, auto-completion, wonderful, wonderful. please be aware that this infrastructure works for your own keys. So if you have configuration for your app, you want content assistance like that for your keys, it's very easy to do. Very easy. I don't have time to show that now, but after the session, if you want to, if you're interested by that, I can show it to you. So the environment, first endpoint that the actuator brings. I can see the system properties in my environment. The environment variables, I can see also the application config. You can see that there is one. You can see the location and the content. So it's very easy for you to connect to an app running in whatever staging production, look at the configuration and clearly identify what the configuration is and where it comes from. It's a REST API, so if you do this, you'll get the value for one key. So think about management infrastructure where you have some complex monitoring system, and you need to make sure that all your app have certain criteria. I don't know, a certain Java version is required. You have an HTTP endpoint. You just do a GET. You get a JSON back with the value, and you can assert that the environment is compliant. It's as easy as that. OK, so for the ones who use hardcore Spring users / beans, an overview of the application context. So I can see all the beans that have been defined. If I'm using complex configuration with bean overriding by name, if anybody did that in his life, or in her life, they will know that it's a nightmare because you don't really know where the overriding comes from. So this endpoint tells you exactly which beans are being defined and where they are being defined. So if my demo application, I can see where it's being defined. Security config, I have the name of the file and everything. Okay. MVC related mappings. Which URI are mapped to this web application? And you can easily see that slash is mapped to this. This is the thing we designed earlier. Who knows what kill -3 the PID does on a Unix system? Kill -3? Anyone? Sorry? No, no. Thread dump. So if you have a problem in production and the application hangs, and of course it only happens in production. I don't know you, but I had once to sign 3 forms to be allowed to SSH to the remote system to do the kill -3 to see why the application was hanging, which was quite a journey. So with Spring Boot, you do that. /dump, and you basically get a thread dump that you can inspect remotely. OK, I want to show you more things, but before I do, I want to show you a new feature in Spring Boot 1.3 called DevTools. So DevTools is something that we did to let you stay in the IDE as much as you can, again, but for a different reason. So to show you how it works, let me just add a dependency. It's a development-only dependency. DevTools. All right. Let's restart that thing. So if I do that, I'll have an extra features in my local environment. One of them is live reload support. Who knows about live reload? A few. OK. So in a nutshell, live reload is you install this plugin. It's free. It works in all browser. If you happen to be working with an application that is live reload compliant, you click on that thing, and the browser will connect to the application. And as a result, the application will be able to send commands to the browser. And we do that. So if I do this, I'm connected now, even though it's not that obvious. And when I do that, Spring Boot will be able to do something with the browser. So let's see. No, let me show you this first. The Earth endpoint. So the Earth endpoint is yet another endpoint that the actuator brings. It's a common place. So again, if you have a monitoring system, if you want to know if your app is up or not, then you have a single place to look for a Spring Boot app. And you can see that there are many aspects to check whether or not your application is up. You see that there is 2 that have been defined, that have been auto-configured. So this is also something that we do internally. So the auto-configuration have a certain smart order. That thing comes last, after most of the other auto-configurations. And in this case, Spring Boot has detected a database. So since there is a database, it's going to start the data source Earth indicator. If I add it like, I don't know, Mongo or Redis or Neo4j or Couchbase or whatever, then a dedicated Earth indicator would be started with it. Now let's assume that your application needs to contact some remote service and you want to get some data out of it, I don't know. And you want to make sure that this service is up, and if that service isn't, then either your application is down or your application has a warning signal or whatever. It's very easy to integrate in that system. So let's do some code. And in this case, yes, it's a Spring Boot specific API, because that's a Spring Boot feature. So I'm going to create an Earth indicator that I'm going to call GOTO Earth indicator. And okay, it's going to do something very smart, you'll see. Focus. I'm going to say my app, Earth. My app is up. Or let's say it's down. And I can also add some detail. I can add an exception, and that's going to be included into the response. Something like that, right? So I'm simply creating a bin definition. If I do that, I have my status. I didn't restart the app, in case you didn't follow. I didn't restart the app, so that's the other thing that DevTools does. And just to show you, if I refresh, just the random thing is not a joke, well, it's partly a joke. It's to show you that every time you hit the endpoint, it's actually going to invoke the method. And you'll have a chance to say, yes, that particular component is up, no, it's down. Or there is an out of service, or there is a warning, or whatever. And you'll see that the status will react accordingly. There is one other endpoint that you can use, which is trace, to trace incoming requests to your service, where you can get a dump of the header, the request headers and the response. And you can see also that we are good citizen, because if the application is down, we return the proper HTTP status, so that you can rely on the HTTP status to figure out if the application is up or not. So DevTools, two main things really. One is live reload integration. So assume that you are working on a template. You just edit your template, you save, bam, your template is refreshed automatically in the browser. One. That's easy enough to do without DevTools. You have to configure a few things, because for instance, for the template engine, we have caching. So if you render the template once and you modify it, by default it would be cached, so nothing would be seen. DevTools make sure to disable the cache when you add DevTools to your project, so that when DevTools is active, you get the nice local development experience. And if you're not, you get the nice production default. That's one. Two, it monitors your classes. It monitors your class path. And when it figures out that something has changed, it restarts the application context for you. So if I change something here, I code something, I create a new action, I create a new method, I create a new REST controller, I create a new JP entity, whatever you name it, and I compile. DevTools will figure that out, restart the app, and you'll have almost immediate feedback. What else? Metrics. How much time do I have? Okay. Metrics. So we have a metric system built in Spring Boot with a very simple API. One API to record counters, so something you can increment, decrement, and one which is gauge, which is recording a single value. We expose all kinds of things related to the VM, and we also expose HTTP-related information. So you can see here the access. Sorry, that's the gauge thing. That's the, oh yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. The counter of HTTP access per HTTP status. So you can see that I've invoked the earth endpoint 3 times, and it returned that the app was down, and 2 times the app was up. I also have the response time of the last request. So the last time I invoked the trace endpoint, it took 10 milliseconds to complete. And you also get incremented auto-configure metrics. So if you have a data source, you also get statistics about the data source. So you'll know how many connections are open for the moment. That's the usage thing, the active thing. And you'll get the percentage of how many % of your connection pool is being used at the moment, which is like 0 because I'm not using it. We also have cache support and cache auto-configuration support for all the major caching systems. So if you drop EHCache, Hazelcast, Infinispan, a JCache provider, Guava, Caffeine, whatever, we are going to auto-configure the caching system for you unless you had your own configuration, and we're going to expose metrics for that. So the hit ratio, the miss ratio, and the size of the cache will be exposed for you if the API exposes that information. So far, we have seen a web application. So I don't want you to leave the room with the impression that Spring Boot is a tool to develop web applications only. So you can build whatever kind of app you want. You can build command line apps if you want. It's very easy to do. So just to show you quickly, the actuator endpoint is also available via JMX if you happen to use that. That might be the one. Yes. So if I go here, I can see all the endpoints. And you see that my custom earth endpoint is there, right? So if you're not building a web application and you add the actuator to your app, you still have all those management endpoints, except there is no web endpoint to call. So you invoke that via JMX. Okay, so it's like I have like 10 minutes if I'm counting right. So it's been 40 minutes-ish that I'm coding. And what I would like you to remember is that I never left the IDE. That's really the impression I would like you to stick from this presentation. I never left the IDE, and I built all that using only the IDE. So for instance, if you want to debug the application, what does it take? It's Tomcat, right? So remote debug, suspend, run the debugger, run the app. The app will connect to the remote debugger, and then you can remote debug. That's the kind of experience that you have with web application. If you want to debug a web application with Spring Boot, you run the debug button, because it's a main class. But sometimes you need to actually ship what you do. And you're not going to do that in an IDE, right? So you probably need something. Let's see. So going outside the IDE for once. And building, so MVN package. Again, simple goal. If I do that, I have this. I have my original app, so only my code, the one you would have if you were, I don't know, developing a library or something, and the main one. And I want to start this app now. So what do I do to start this app? Well, I do this. So java-jar, the name of the jar, and your app will start. This is very important, because if you think about cloud environment, that's really, really suited for cloud environments. You have one file, you ship one file, and you start a process. And the process is your app. And if I go back here, I will, it's obviously still up. So you can do things like this also, if you can read. So -- server.port 7070. And it's gone, just to show it's not running. Now it's there, and I need to authenticate, of course. Let's do that. So server.port is one of the many customizations that are available to from Spring Boot. You can find them here. So if you type server, you'll get all these, including the port. Okay? So once you have that, you have one file. It's a process. You can ship the process. If you happen to have a customer that requires you to build a whole file, which might happen, unfortunately, Spring Boot supports that just fine. If you want to know how it works, I could show you, but you could also do this. Choose WAR packaging there, generate a project that's going to generate a WAR with all the same features that the thing I've shown. You get a WAR, you deploy a WAR, and well, you have your traditional WAR deployment. A few more things about deployment. Let's make that executable. Let's see what it does. Oh, executable flag on it, on a jar file. Yep. So executable basically brings everything that's required to execute your process, execute your app. So you don't have a bash script and the jar, just the jar is the thing you start. If you think further about initd support or anything that Unix provides you to running services, we integrate with that. So if you do a symbolic link from etc, initd, whatever to this, and you do service whatever start, it will start without any further configuration. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for attending, and I'm waiting for your questions.
There have been some questions asked through the app, so I'll start with those. First, a non-boot question, but for people that have been working with Spring for a number of years already, what happened to Spring Roo? And is there still a use case compared to Spring Boots?
As far as I know, Spring Roo is still under development, not under the not the Spring team working on it. There is a company in Spain, I believe. They are working on it. And they will already have released a 2.0 M1, I believe, which is based on Spring Boot, by the way. So if you want to know about that stuff, all the links and the sites and everything, it's still up. But yep. We're not working on it actively anymore.
Yep. And do you have any experience with Spring Boot in combination with AWS Lambda? Not sure if that makes sense. But
no, I haven't. Sorry.
Depending on who asked that, maybe you would like to clarify your question.
Sorry? It's a what? That should work.
Yeah, but it's an
app tried,
rather than a service. Yep. Yeah. Finally, a very detailed one. Does Spring Boot work on WebSphere 8.5.5?
I will, because it's recorded, so I'm not going to positively say yes, but I did try WebSphere 8.5 something recently, and it did work, yes. I don't know if the .5 is important in the question, but 8.5 something does.
It is really detailed. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I saw that there were 1 or 2 other questions, but just please
Yeah,
come
feel
up
free to come
to the stage afterwards. Okay, thank you very much, and don't forget to vote.